Well, good morning, YouTubers and history lovers. I'm continuing my drive slowly toward the East Coast, and today I'm at Fort Ticonderoga on a overcast, rainy Saturday morning. I'm waiting around about 5-10 minutes now for the guided tour to start, and I think I'm probably going to be following this group of young skulls full of mush, as one radio commentator would call them. So we're looking down over the lake, and we can come in and look at the fort itself. Visitor center's over there. This place is not particularly inexpensive. It cost me $13.50 to get in. So I imagine this is kind of a timeline of the fort, so I will walk slowly past it and hope that the rain doesn't mess up my lens so much that you can't read it. I imagine this rain is not doing any good for either of the two cameras that I brought along, but I don't have a lot of choice on a day like this. Okay, let's go over by the American flag, which is where the tour starts.
So, French and Indian War takes place here in North America from about 1754 to 1760. The combatants are the French, British, and the British with their respective Indian allies. Okay? And provincials are British. Okay? So that's the French and Indian War. French and Indian War is part of a much larger global war at that time known as the 7 Years' War. It's probably the First World War. It takes place in Europe, North Africa, the West Indies, India, and here in North America. Okay? And it's the British against the French. Here, our little sliver of it here in North America involves Native Americans who are going to side with both of the combatants. So there's probably 60 different Indian nations involved in the French Indian War. And most of them are going to align themselves with the French. 40 or more are aligned with the French. The British, their most notable Indian allies, are going to be the Iroquois Confederacy. So those 6 nations here in New York, not 5, 6 by this time. And it's the Mohawk, Oneida. The Oneida invite in the Tuscarora, that's why there's 6. The Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Saints. So those 6 nations align themselves with the British. Pretty much any other tribe you can think of probably align with the French. New France at this time is Canada, east of the Great Lakes, including the Great Lakes, down the Ohio Valley, down to Mississippi to Louisiana. The British, of course, they have the 13 colonies. The French control Lake Champlain. So all the water that you see around you is Lake Champlain. You cannot see Lake George from here, although Lake George is very close. Just to the southwest is the northern end of Lake George, so probably 1.5 miles as the crow flies. Lake George is 33 miles long, and it flows south to north. And it empties into Lake Champlain. Lake Champlain, 130 miles long, and it flows south to north. The northern end is actually in Canada. 100 miles to the north of us. It does extend another 25 miles to the south. Lake George and Lake Champlain are connected by the Lachute River. Lachute River is only 4 miles long. Kind of winds its way through the town of Ticonderoga. But Lake George is 220 feet higher in elevation than Lake Champlain. So the Lachute is really nothing more than 5 waterfalls. It's not navigable. You can't take a boat from Lake George into Lake Champlain. So, The French are going to build this fort in 1755 because they want to keep the British out of Lake Champlain. And once they establish the fort here on the peninsula and mount their guns, it's never attacked from the water. It's too formidable. So the fort is actually built on a peninsula that comes out into the lake. So to the south, the east, and to the north is all Lake Champlain. The largest cannons here today are 24-pounders. Now, back when the French held the fort, you easily had 36-pounders. But a 24-pounder, that will fire a solid 24-pound ball 2 miles. Very active. So any boats in the water will be sunk in a matter of minutes. 36-pounders, they only go 3 miles. So, no threat from the water. The French are going to build this fort in 1755 with the 3 stone buildings you'll see in a moment when you go inside the fort. So off to the right is the Magazine de War, the King's Warehouse. Off to the left is the officers' barracks for the French. And this entire building here would have been the enlisted men's barracks. And enlisted men's barracks is kind of a misnomer because it's not just enlisted men, it's pretty much artillery men, the guys who fire the cannons. The infantry, they're always going to be outside the fort walls, in tents or in huts. And the French are going to call this fort what? They don't call it Ticonderoga, so it's not a trick question. I'm not trying to set you up. They call it Carillon. That's the name they give it, Carillon. All right, so in 1757, Joseph Louis, Marquis de Montcalm, the French Major General in North America. He's going to be the commandant here at Carillon. He's going to take 8,000 troops, including many of his Indian allies. He's going to go down the length of Lake George, and he's going to lay siege under Fort William Henry, and he's going to burn it to the ground. That is the massacre of Fort William Henry. James Fenimore Cooper writes his novel, Last Mohicans, based on that event. The very next year, at the ruins of Fort William Henry, the British are going to build a new fort, and it's much larger than Fort William Henry, and that fort is called Fort George. So they're going to build Fort George, named after King George, just like the lake. And now they're under General James Abercrombie, and Abercrombie has 17,000 troops. Now, about 6,000 of them are what we would call British regulars, the redbacks, okay? And then the other 11,000 are provincials, so from the colonies here. All our shoes are made off of straight laths. What does that mean to you? I have no idea what it means to you. I know what it means to me. It means that when I receive my brand new pair of shoes for the very first time, they're identical. There's no right or left. You put them on your feet. You march around for 3 or 4 hours, they become right and left. Either that, or your feet become straight.
We make all the shoes for all our staff, and then they wear them, and then eventually wear them out. And they find their way back to us to be repaired. So right now I'm in the process of doing a repair known as a half sole. This weather is being a little difficult for me today. Shoemaking is a very temperature sensitive trade. So unfortunately this cold weather's not being very nice to my wax today.
Yeah.
Clothing. All our clothing, hand-stitched, tailored to the individual, all made right up there on the second floor. That's where our tailor shop is. So our tailors, our shoemakers, are using the same tools, the same techniques, the same materials that would have been used back here in 1776.
So the shoemaker was on that door on the lower floor here. We'll go up to the second floor, and I believe that's where they're doing making clothes.
Yeah, I was saying, hey there.
Hey.
Oh, so, you use the easy way.
Welcome to the workspace of the
which
tailors.
is similar.
So the shop that's here in 1776 is doing lots of repair work as well as making of new clothing. At this time of year, that's lots of waistcoats being made, similar to this one right here.
Is that really in your armpits?
No.
Okay.
Captain Lacey's company of the 4th Battalion, Pennsylvania, who our staff represent at this time of year, are getting issued lots of drab colored cloth as well as brown colored cloth. So we're working with the brown colored cloth right now. Actually, we're working with the drab colored cloth, turning into the waistcoats and breeches. So we make all of the clothing for our staff here. So at this time of year, they also need some new waistcoats as well as breeches.
I'm guessing the choice of color is because you didn't dye the sheep, just let the wool as is?
Drab just refers to undyed.
Okay.
So, undyed.
This building here, this is the enlistment barracks. Back in the day, would have held about 360 artillerymen. Today, it houses our museum. On the second and third floor, we have all kinds of exhibits related to history here in the peninsula, as well as the French and Indian War, the American Revolution. Right here is our timeline. So we have personal items of a lot of notables from that period, including the French explorer Samuel de Champlain. Samuel de Champlain. What has he found? The lake, exactly. The lake that bears his name. Samuel D. Lake Samuel D. No, Lake Champlain, of course. Now, notice I said he found the lake. He found the lake in 1609. He doesn't discover the lake. The Indians knew where the lake was over.
They're going to be doing a musket firing demonstration down there. So I'm up on the bastion with all the artillery and the mortars. Again, here's a mortar. These little ones are mortars. I understand that these are 24 pounders. 24, that basically means they fire a solid 24-pound iron ball. And the gentleman downstairs said that the maximum range for a 24-pounder was about 2 miles, although I'm not convinced they're going to be completely accurate at that distance. It is interesting that they certainly are going to have no problem covering the lake out here. Nothing is going to go up and down that body of water past these cannon. So this fort really is an artillery fort. The infantry would have been outside the walls in huts or tents. Here's a mortar that's been split in half. There's one of the other pieces of it, but you can see there. Not a lot of depth to it. You can see in the lower part right there, that's where the powder charge would go, and then the barrel, the ball, would sit up in that area.
And in this building here, this is the magazine de Wire of the King's Warehouse, built by the French in 1756. That's the building they blew up in 1759 with that 40-ton of black powder. Never restored by the British or the Americans. It remained a huge hole in the ground for well over 200 years. It was just restored in 2008. We now call it the Mars Education Center because it was made possible with a very generous donation from the M&M's candy people. Please, no Snickers. Now, you're going to go through the red doors. It's a modern building inside. So we have restrooms and drinking fountains right off the lobby. It's heated. But I want you to go down to the lower level because in the gallery, in the lower level, there's a brand new exhibit this year called Crowning Fashion. It's actually 3 uniforms from the American Revolution, 240 years old. also Benjamin Warner's knapsack. Benjamin Warner is a soldier from Connecticut during the Revolution. He has a knapsack. He takes that down to his family. His family ultimately donates it to the museum. So along with the knapsack, Benjamin Warner writes a note to his family talking about the sacrifices that he
These two cannon, according to the guide, are two of the cannon that were taken, the original cannon taken from Fort Ti by the Green Mountain Boys and hauled during the winter down the lake here, Lake George, or Lake, and across Massachusetts into Boston, and then used in Boston to finally convince the British that they could not defend the city anymore. So it's interesting, these are actually 200 and some year old cannon.
Right hand cap to the back, charge that cartridge all the way down the barrel, ram it on down, you turn your ramrod, and come up to this position of cover. So the sergeant or officer in charge of the company notice the men are loaded and ready to fire. Shoulder your fire lock. Next command being, make ready. Rear ranks can take that half step over. Every man's in full confidence of weapon. Waiting for the next command to preset. Rear ranks will brace their arm up against the men in front of them, taking careful aim at a target in front of them, waiting for the next command to fire. Leaders fire off their weapons, come back to this position, half-cock their weapons, and wait for the next command to prime it, load. Back to your cartridge box. Pull out that charge. Prime it again. Can't sit down. Get that lovely sulfur in your mouth. Show me yours. Fire on.
Well, I must admit that I've lost my sense of direction here, and usually I'm pretty good at that. But I think that I am in the southeast corner of the fort, up at the level where the 24-pounder cannons are. And this building here is the Barracks building. And then this is the second level of the, what was the French magazine that was blown up and only rebuilt less than 10 years ago. I think they're going to be firing the muskets again. Maybe it's because I've done reenacting for so many years that firing the musket is not something I need to see more than just the once they did it here. They're using a different drill than I learned with the 60th Regiment of Foot. This is an American drill. I learned a British drill, but the concept of firing the musket is still the same, so we'll skip that. I'm going to see if I can get in one of these doors so I can take a look at the second floor of this building where they've got a lot of modern exhibits. I only heard 2 muskets go off and there's 4 people down there. It is kind of a wet day, so I wouldn't be surprised if there were 2 misfires. Okay, I'm inside the second floor of the museum that's built where the enlisted barracks was. And of course, the angle is garbage to shoot through glass like this, but here's some earlier photos of this place. There's that. Oh, that's a picture of President Taft. There's the ruins of the West Barracks at Ticonderoga as seen from the north. So that's what it looked like before they did any restoration. Not much left. There's a picture of Philip Schuyler, Chuyler, and a musket and a few other pieces from the time period. Here's 3 Brown Bess muskets. And I'm guessing that these are originals, not like the copies I've got at home. The Brown Bess musket is a 75 caliber long land musket, and it represents the short musket. Both commonly known as Brown Bess. They were the standard weapons of British soldiers from around 1720 to the end of the 18th century. And during the American Revolution, they were carried by soldiers of both armies. Numerous variations and improvements to the Brown Bess muskets were all manufactured according to the standards set up and approved by separate boards of ordnance for the Army based in England and the Army based in Ireland. Ooh, shackles. Not going to go walk very far with those on. The bottom one is a sword, and the top one is a horseman's saber, cavalry saber. Well, I'm walking down the hill in front of Fort Ticonderoga, where they've got some of their interpreters are building a shed, which would be used as winter quarters for infantry. And it looks like they're using period tools to do all this. So let's go take a quick look at what they're doing here.
Hi, sir.
Hello. So what are you making on this fine day?
Well, this is a good inspirational day to build more shelter.
Yes.
Build another hut just like that one there. So over there, they're working on doing the mortises on the plate and the sill. So it goes at the bottom and the top of the walls. So it'll fit the tenons that we've already cut for the posts.
Okay.
And then here, we're actually starting on the next part, which is cutting and doing the joinery work for the roof rafters. So I'm just cutting, this is a little tenon that'll lock the top of the rafter into the ridge, which runs right down the top center of the roof.
And what is the whole purpose of the building?
Soldiers' huts.
Soldiers' huts. A hut that size for how many?
What?
For how many soldiers in a hut that size?
10 to 12. It's part of that. We actually just a moment ago, some ways by accident, we cut posts for bunk racks to go inside that one. Well, we're trying to get the second of these 2 huts hopefully framed and raised, so that then we can start, before it gets too cold, starting to do the internal work on it.
Okay.
Bunks, fireplaces, all that.
Sawing wet wood has got to be fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's also green wood too, which is, to be honest, we're happy to use because it's what historically they're using. But it has some advantages to it. You can do things quickly in green wood that you can't do in dry wood. Like we can just drive nails into it, and it won't split out because the grain still has some flexibility. Right now I'm just chamfering the edges a little bit, which will make this a little easier to lock in later. that. Tennant's done. Hey Alec, I'm ready to flip. Yeah, 6 more of these, or 5 more of these, and we'll have the rafters ready. And then after that, we'll go ahead and cut the ridge, as well as the 2 purlins, the beams that run midway across the roof.
Okay, interesting.
If you want to brave the mud there, you're welcome to do so. Climb inside the slightly more finished one.
How's it going?
Good. So there's the pretty much finished hut. There's the one they're working on now. And it looks like they've got it staked off to do a third one. And as you can see, I'm slightly down the hill from Fort Ticonderoga. I'd like to walk up toward these 2 guys who are doing the cooking at what they describe as the company kitchen. Basically, it's a series of fire holes, each one of which around this mound can be used to heat 1 pot for a group of 6 to 10 soldiers in a given mess, where any one of the soldiers is designated to be the cook. I think it's an interesting way of doing it. The fire stays a little bit drier in this weather because it's under the mud. And what they dug out from the edges there, they can put on top to make their bake oven. So.
How are you, sir?
Good.
This is your typical camp kitchen.
Take one more look at Lake Champlain and the area around Fort Ticonderoga before I leave on this misty, drizzly day in October.